I actually had a tougher transition from Army to IBM than I did from IBM to NATO. I did 27 years in the Army, or nearly 27 years in the Army, as a field artillery officer, and spent some of that time as a foreign area officer for Western Europe, which took me to the French Army Staff College. So I spent a lot of time in France. I've spent more than 21 years living in Europe between Germany, France, and Belgium. I had 17 different nationalities that worked in my division at NATO. And so one of the ways that I broke the ice with them is I like language. I speak French, I speak reasonable German, I'm pretty good in English, and I made the effort to first ask them and get them to teach me how to say the greeting of the day, good morning, hello, whatever was the appropriate way of addressing them in their language. And then every day when I walked down the hallway, if they were at their desk and their doors were open, as I walked by, I would greet everyone left and right of the hallway in their language.
Hey, let's welcome Ernest E.J. Herold, a retired U.S. Army colonel, former Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Defense Investment at NATO, Executive Director of IISS Americas, and current Board Chair of MITS Capital. Welcome to the show, sir. Honored to speak with you today.
Thanks for inviting me, Danny. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely. Well, what's your story in your own words, as much as you can share with me?
Sure. You touched on a few of the positions I've had most recently. I make the joke that I'm a guy who can't hold a job. I keep bouncing from one thing to the next. But in fact, I did 27 years in the Army, or nearly 27 years in the Army, as a field artillery officer, and spent some of that time as a foreign area officer for Western Europe, which took me to the French Army Staff College, the Joint Staff College, and then on a subsequent trip back to Paris, attended the Armaments War College. So I spent a lot of time in France. I've spent more than 21 years living in Europe between Germany, France, and Belgium. And when I got to Paris on my second tour as the chief of the Office of Defense Cooperation, the Army offered me a windowless room in the Pentagon or an assignment to Stuttgart, Germany, at the EUCOM headquarters, and neither of those sounded attractive to me. And my attitude had always been that I would stay in the Army as long as it was fun, and the fun had come to an end. So I went to Brussels and went to work for IBM. I was their business development executive, responsible for NATO and EUCOM and AFRICOM. And during that time, I befriended a lot of the people inside NATO headquarters and realized that I'd really rather be doing the work they were doing than what I was doing with IBM. And so I applied for and was fortunate to be selected as Deputy Assistant Secretary General. So I got to move into the diplomatic world. I spent 6.5 years working in the international staff for two different secretaries general, and it was an absolutely fantastic experience. But everything comes to an end, so I finished that in 2018. I came home to the United States, bounced around from two different think tanks, CNAS, the Center for New American Security, where I was an adjunct senior fellow working transatlantic security issues. And then I got the opportunity to lead the Washington office of IISS, which I did for about a little over 2 years. That too was a fascinating opportunity. Then I went to Security and Defense Consulting and the MITS Capital position. I'm also President and Chief Operating Officer of a veteran charity called Veteran Coalition International, and we're trying to build the relationship between veteran offices on the one hand and veteran charities on the other, among, as the first group of nations, the NATO nations and their partners, roughly 45 nations, to try to get them to share best practices across borders, something that doesn't happen organically. Our motto is we fight together, we heal together. We know how to fight together as a coalition. We're not so good at healing together, and this is the mission of Veteran Coalition International, to try to bring people together and learn from each other so that all veterans will benefit from similar opportunities.
Yeah, pretty extensive experience, I should say, and that's great. How did you adapt to diplomatic world, working with NATO after more than 2 decades of serving in the uniform, which in like to my understanding, it's quite different from the military, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And the fortunate thing is that for many of us who've served in uniform, particularly in the officer corps, we're given opportunities throughout our career to experience things that are outside of our primary training and responsibility that help with our personal growth and our professional expertise. The way I describe it to young people that I mentor over time is everything that you do is another tool for your kit bag. Whether you like doing it or not, whether you're good at it or not, it's an experience that someday in the future will serve you. So as a major, I was assigned to the UN mission in Haiti, and I was the chief of the Joint Visitors Bureau, which meant that every senior official on the military side that came to visit the UN mission in Port-au-Prince came through me. And so I dealt with chiefs of defense, I dealt with ministers of defense, I dealt with ambassadors, and it exposed me to this idea of senior level leadership and, in particular, diplomats. Now, that didn't teach me diplomacy, but it taught me about what their interests were, what their activities they were focused on, and what their priorities were. And I could compare and contrast those with the military mission to try to understand the strategic impact. In addition, as a foreign area officer, I went through academic, military, and other training to prepare me to serve as a military diplomat, a foreign area officer. And that's what I did as the chief of the Office of Defense Cooperation. So I didn't come to diplomacy with no skills or no experience. I had served in the UN mission. I had been close to the special representative of the Secretary General and his staff, getting to observe how the civilian side of the mission operated. I served in the embassy in Paris really twice because as a student, I spent a lot of time interacting with the staff in the embassy as part of my broader education. And then I went to NATO as a major from Paris as the aide de camp to the U.S. military representative, the three-star general that was representing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So I was inside NATO headquarters for a year, getting to interact with my peers in the other nations. At the time, it was a while ago, so we were only 16 nations in NATO, not the 32 of today. But nonetheless, I had quite a broad experience there of the international environment. So when I came to it in 2012, it was not all that unfamiliar to me. There were certainly things that, my staff would say, "That's the Army officer in you coming out. Remember, you're a diplomat now." But it was not quite the brutal transition that you might expect. In fact, I actually had a tougher transition from Army to IBM than I did from IBM to NATO.
Interesting. And let's talk about your leadership philosophy and how it was different in the army versus in NATO and in diplomatic world. Maybe you had to take different approaches, or maybe it was quite similar. What was your experience with that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Danny, because my experience over 26 plus years in the Army was that my leadership style evolved from the time I was a second lieutenant until I was a full colonel. You change your leadership depending on the environment, the situation, the needs of the organization that you're part of or leading, and do the things that will connect with the people you're working with in the best possible way. So, as an Army officer, yes, when I was in command, I was in charge. I gave directives. People responded to those directives because that's the hierarchy that we were part of. But what I learned over that time in uniform is that people are motivated differently. And so not everybody responds to the same stimulus. Not everybody is good with being told directly, do this and do it now. So you learn to understand the people you're working with and you develop an empathy for how they will receive what you're asking them to do and try to meet them where they are with certainly not compromising the mission that you're trying to pass to them or the expectations you have for them, but doing it in a way that communicates to their way of receiving the information, they're receiving the instruction that you're giving them so that they can be the best they can possibly be and do what you expect of them without having to come back time and again.
And another question here, which fascinates me, is how people approach the balance between giving orders versus motivating people. And I can imagine in the military, as a colonel, or maybe even before raising through the ranks, you had to balance this. And then once you transition out of the military, how this balance changes because people in the military, they it's not as easy to leave, say, the army as it is to leave some corporate America job. So you have a little more freedom in the civilian world, or probably as well in diplomacy. So how do you see that balance, and how your perspective evolved over time there?
Well, first, I would challenge your premise a little bit. Leaving the army is a personal choice. I mean, yes, there are contracts. If you're an enlisted man, you have a certain amount of time that you've agreed to serve. But as an officer, you serve at the pleasure of the president. You serve as long as you keep getting promoted and your performance is appropriate. But you can also decide that you've had enough. It's time to go. Your personal desires are no longer aligned with the needs of the army or the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines. So you can leave, and many people do at different points. Some will leave after their first commitment. So when I came in, that was a 4-year commitment coming out of West Point. I had to serve, or I'm sorry, it was 5 years. At the end of 5 years, I could have left. Many of my, not many, but some of my classmates did. At the end of 10 years, people kind of look at that, or looked at it in my day, as the halfway point to 20 years and a pension. And if they were not sure that they wanted to stay, that was a good point to leave because they were probably coming out of their time as a captain, about to make or having made major, and they could gauge whether they wanted to continue a career into the future. And so we lost a bunch of people then. After 10 years, most people don't leave the army until there's a reason to leave. They shoot for the objective of 20 years and getting the pension that was offered. And sometimes people didn't make it to 20 because they failed to get promoted or selected to schooling, etc. So there are lots of ways to leave the army. That said, you asked the question about the difference between giving orders or motivating people in the army versus in the diplomatic world. And quite honestly, the first thing that was significantly different is I knew that many of the people I was dealing with had no military background, and trying to lead them in the way I had done in uniform was probably not going to be the most productive way of dealing with them, simply because it was so foreign to them. So it was incumbent on me as the new boss to figure out how to motivate them in ways that were culturally and linguistically appropriate. Remember, I wasn't just dealing with Americans. I had 17 different nationalities that worked in my division at NATO. And so one of the ways that I broke the ice with them is I like language. I speak French, I speak reasonable German. I'm pretty good in English. And I made the effort to first ask them and get them to teach me how to say the greeting of the day, good morning, hello, whatever was the appropriate way of addressing them in their language. And then every day when I walked down the hallway, if they were at their desk and their doors were open, as I walked by, I would greet everyone left and right of the hallway in their language. The smiles that I got from people's faces, the relaxation because they felt recognized, and here was the boss coming down the hallway and talking to me, not just saying hello to me, but saying hello in my cultural context, saying hello in my language, in my way. And that helped to create a sense of, hey, this guy is new, he's coming from the military, he's coming from industry, and he's now in this diplomatic environment, but maybe we should give him the benefit of the doubt. And then after that, I simply dealt with people as I learned their personalities, as I saw how they reacted and worked. I tried to address them in that way. So I had, and these sound like caricatures, but I had some German folks that worked with me. They wanted a direct guidance, and they gave me direct answers. Other people from the Romance countries, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, they operated differently. And so I had to deal with them a bit differently. What I also learned going into that diplomatic environment was I had a lot of smart people working for me, and I didn't have all the answers. So I was very willing to hear their ideas. And we would always have prep sessions before each interaction with the nations. As we as staff would come and hold committee meetings, they would prepare me by telling me what they thought was going to happen, how they had interpreted the interactions they had had in preparing the documents that would be presented to the committee. And I was a student. I was listening to them and I was taking what I understood of their guidance, running it through my own personal filters, knowing where the Secretary General and the NATO leadership were trying to go, and tried to use what they did in ways that communicated their work effectively to the nations sitting around the table. It was a great learning experience for me, and I think they got something from my style as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating to see how you interact with different cultures, especially, within NATO, quite different cultures, nations, from
Mhm.
the US to Italy to Turkey to all of the different countries in Europe. And you also, at the start of the show, you also said that you're working on this nonprofit, if I'm not mistaken, to help veterans from different cultures, which is helping veterans by itself within the US is quite a challenge. But then if you take it to the global level with, as you said, languages and some cultural shifts, how do you operate this whole system and find the way to communicate and to deliver some kind of value to the veterans from all of the different nations?
Well, the role of VCI is not to do what anybody else is doing. We're not trying to duplicate what any other veteran organization is up to. But what we recognized as we started this organization and started to interact across borders, and our first international move was to take some of our partners from Denmark with us into Ukraine to visit Kiev, to meet other non-governmental organizations who were working, trying to help veterans through medical problems, legal problems, financial problems. So we met prosthetics manufacturers, we met medical personnel, we met physical therapists, and we met government officials and talked to them about the needs of their veteran population. As we came back out from that trip, my chairman and I sat in the back seat of the van that was driving. It was about an 18-hour drive from Kiev to Warsaw, and we spent that time brainstorming how we were going to transform this charity that had started trying to do person to person aid and support, and take it to another level where we were working with governments and organizations and trying to get them to share their best practices across borders. So we really operate on two different levels: the strategic level at the government or intergovernmental level, and the person to person, the boots on the ground kind of stuff, where we bring veterans together from different nationalities to heal. And the reason that works is, if I'm an American and I have something that's bothering me, I might be reluctant to talk to another American soldier or veteran about my challenges, because our military environment is very macho. It's very self sufficient. You have to present yourself as self assured, ready to lead, always prepared. And that can be intimidating if you're trying to tell somebody about your struggles with PTSD or your struggles with a physical problem that is a result of your service. And bringing people from different nationalities who may never see each other again together in environments where we conduct activities that will be familiar to them. So we might run a shooting range and give them the opportunity to shoot different nations' weapons or something like that. In that process, they meet each other, they talk to each other, they learn about each other's differences from their own experience, and that helps them to break down barriers, and they will tell each other more intimate things that they might not share with their countrymen, that leads to a catharsis and a healing that helps them when they go back home to continue with therapy or to continue with a physical training or to continue with pursuing a graduate degree or whatever the activities they're in that might be hindered by challenges in their life. Those challenges are placed into perspective by these interactions with people from other cultures and languages. So those are the two levels that we operate in that veterans charity. this next week, I'm going to be in Prague, where we're going to be sponsored by the Minister of Defense to convene a meeting. We'll have about 18 of the nations that we've been targeting coming together to tell their stories, to share their best practices, the good things they've learned to do, and hopefully informing others who will take those ideas, or at least take their contact information, so that when they go home, they'll be able to try to personalize it to their own environment, to create something that is appropriate for veterans in fill in the blanks, whatever country they're in, having heard from another country how they solved a problem that is present in their experience.
And was there culture or a nationality or a few of them that took you some time to understand? Because, every nation, every culture, even within one country, you have different cultures. Were there some of them that you struggled to figure out for a while or that took you longer than the others to understand?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's interaction with people. You're always going to confront people that you think you said something to them, and they shook their head like they agreed, and then they go off and do something completely different. And you sit there scratching your head saying, I thought I told them what I wanted, but they're clearly doing something else. Well, maybe there's a reason that they're doing something else. And in their own experience or understanding, what they were going off to do was the precursor to get to the thing that they'd been asked to do, but it wasn't obvious to me. And so we spend a lot of time in our organization trying to communicate effectively. Obviously, because coalition operations are usually conducted in English, we operate primarily in English. However, I speak French and German. My chairman speaks Greek and some Danish. We have other people that speak Spanish and Ukrainian and Polish and German. So we've got people that are coming with different cultural experiences that are part of this process. But you're right. When we talk to a new organization, and it's usually like this, our first contact is through virtual means. So we don't have the full context of body language and seeing the whole person as they're talking to us. And it can lead to misunderstanding. So we make a big effort to try to establish a person-to-person contact as soon as possible within our outreach, because we think it's very important. So to that end, I spend quite a bit of time going back and forth from here in the United States to Europe to interact with people from different organizations. I've even gone as far as Australia. Okay, truth in advertising. It's because my wife is an Australian and we were visiting family. But I took the opportunity while there to go to the capital and to meet with the Department of Veterans Affairs, which actually led to a really cool experience. I asked them what they did that they were proud of. What was some practice or procedure or rule or something that they had, and they shared a story with me, and I remembered that story. And when I was later, about 2 months later, in Belgium, talking to the colonel that heads the Belgian Veterans Organization, I said, "What's your biggest problem?" And she said to me, "Well, I've got this problem and I don't know how to attack it." And I said, "Well, I've got an idea for you. Why don't you talk to my friends over in Australia? I think you could learn something from each other. I'll make an introduction and leave it to the two of you to interact and decide. You decide if what they have to offer is useful or not, and let me know how it goes." I was back about 3 more months later, and I went to see this colonel again, and she held up her laptop and she said, "Look, this is what the Australians gave me. And then, look, this is how I made it Belgian." And it helped her tremendously, making that connection. But she never would have reached out to Australia. That would never occur. So getting the opportunity to meet people where they are, doing what they're doing for and with and by veterans, I get to bring that back and share that with people and try to take it across borders. And what we ultimately are trying to do is to create a database of points of contact that can be used by our team when nations contact us and say, "I need to be able to do this thing." We can go into the database and we can choose, 3, 4, 5 different nations and organizations, send them the contact information and say to them, "Look, You contact the ones that you'd like to talk to. You'll find different ideas from each of them. If you find something that works, that's great. Let us know. And if you don't find anything, let us know that as well, and we'll keep looking until we find someone that can help you.
Well, and I've already learned so much just from your diplomatic experience and, your more recent experience with working in different domains with veterans and other organizations. But if you could take away a lesson or two from your whole career, is if one or two of those lessons can be shared with the audience, let's say a 20-year-old man or a woman that is listening to this show, what would that be?
So you ask a great question, and it makes me think back to one night when I was probably in mid-career in the Army, and my wife and I were sitting outside drinking a glass of wine, enjoying the night with a candle burning, and just having a nice, quiet date night evening. And at one point, I kind of leaned back and sighed and said, "Gee, I've been really lucky in my Army career. I've gotten everything that I wanted." And my wife nearly spit her wine out. I said, "What are you talking about? You wanted this job, you got that job. You wanted to go to this post, you got sent to that post. You thought you were going to this school, you went to that school." And I sat back and I listened to that and I realized that, well, she was right, that I made plans, but those plans didn't always work out. But then I looked at her and I said, "Yeah, but it all worked out, didn't it?" And the point is, you have to plan. And there's an old quote from I think it was Eisenhower that said, "Planning is everything. The plan means nothing." In other words, you can make a plan, but reality will intrude, circumstances will interrupt, and it won't go exactly the way you had foreseen it. But having a plan and knowing where you want to get to, as you go through life and you hit those zigzags, that opens up new possibilities. And so when you don't get the thing you thought you really wanted, the only thing you ever wanted to do, it's not a disaster. It's going to work out. There's going to be an opportunity in that change that will open possibilities you never dreamed of. I didn't sit back as a cadet at West Point and look to the future and say, "I'm going to be a deputy assistant secretary general at NATO." It never occurred to me. I barely knew what NATO was in those days. I knew it was something that the U.S. Army was going to be a part or was a part of, and that I would likely have some contact with NATO forces. But I never thought I'd be a leader within the organization. So, for the 20-year-olds out there, don't worry that you don't know what you want to be when you grow up. Get started on something that is taking you on a path that you want to pursue. It might be the major that you studied in college. It might not be. It might be the passion that you have for underwater basket weaving that wasn't on the curriculum at your state university, but you want to try and do that. And in doing underwater basket weaving, you'll meet the guy who's an entrepreneur who's looking for somebody to be his sales rep to sell his underwater baskets. You just never know. You will meet people, and you should remain open to the possibilities that present themselves. The second, because you asked me for at least two lessons, and I alluded to it earlier. I had some jobs that I never wanted. I was asked to do something, and I knew it was important to my boss. And so I said, "Yes, sir, I'll do it." And I went in and I did it to the absolute best of my ability. It wasn't where I wanted to be. It wasn't the thing I wanted to do, but I knew it wasn't forever. And that job got me noticed because I was doing something that nobody else wanted to do. And I was doing well at it. And because I did well at it, I was given another opportunity. And that opportunity led to another, and so on. So, whatever job you're given, wherever you go, do it to the best of your ability. Learn the skills that are part of the condition, that job, uh, that temporal time that you spend doing that job. Because you will find at some point in your future that those tools in your tool bag will come in handy. A good example, my first week at NATO, in fact, my second day on the job, one of my subordinates came to me and said, "We've got this terrible problem between us and another staff division, and I can't solve this, and it's going to cause problems with the allied nations because we're not doing our job as staff, and it's a terrible problem." So I called the boss of that division I called another guy who was responsible for HR and said, "Hey, can you guys come over for a cup of coffee? I've got some questions for you." And they came. I laid out the challenge as it had been explained to me. And I said, "How do you guys see it?" Essentially, we negotiated through the problem in about 10 minutes over a cup of coffee, and everybody left happy. And I could then go tell my subordinate how we had fixed the problem. 3 days later, the head of HR for NATO called and asked to come and see me. And I said, "Sure, come on by." He sat down in my office. He said, "I don't understand. On your second day in the job, you solved a problem that had been going on between your two divisions for at least 8 months and was threatening to upend a lot of stuff. And you solved it in about 20 minutes. How did you do that? How did you know to do that?" And I said, "Well, this is not my first leadership job. I had to do these things in the Army all the time. You have personalities, you have competing priorities, you have people who think they're absolutely right, and both of them may be, but you can't have two people who are completely right. So you got to figure out how to make the whole thing work." The objective was serve the nations, make the committees successful in the work that they were doing to present new ideas to the allies. And it wasn't about the egos or the personalities of the staff officers who were in friction with each other. We had a job to do. So, having gone back to tools in my kit bag that I could take out and employ on the second day on the job may have surprised the HR guy, but it was no surprise to me because it just felt like business as usual.
Hey, that was a good first impression in the at the
Yeah.
at the new job. No, that's great. Thank you for sharing the lessons, and that's very practical. And I can, I see some of that in my experience. I'm just 23. I haven't been a in the leadership role at NATO yet, but at my level, I already saw some of that. So definitely super helpful lessons. And yeah, again, thank you for coming over today and sharing your story and lessons. Super valuable. And just wanted to say thank you again.
Well, Danny, it's a pleasure to talk to you. For those in your audience that are following you and listening to the different people you're bringing in, I think it's useful that they hear lots of different ideas from lots of different folks who, I'm a little longer in the tooth now. I've had a long career of experiences, and it's fun for me to get a chance to share with you and your audience those experiences that may or may not be useful. At least I hope I entertained them, if nothing else.
Yeah, no, that's super useful in whatever career you're pursuing because, I can see how I can apply these lessons in my tech job, even as a software engineer, because these leadership principles and how you deal with people, how you negotiate, they apply to many, many different circumstances. So definitely helpful. I think we can wrap it up. Thank you for joining, sir, again, and great time.